Mrs. Johnson quickly noticed something was off with her horse, Daisy. She was acting differently, restless and uneasy. Mrs. Johnson had seen this kind of behavior before, but only in horses that were going into labor. That was the strange part. Daisy had never shown any signs of being pregnant. But as her behavior kept getting more intense, it became clear something was happening. Daisy was, in fact, in labor. What happened next left everyone completely stunned, but not for the reason you'd expect. After one last push, the foal's head and front legs finally appeared, followed shortly by the rest of its body. Daisy gently licked her foal clean and seemed calm, like everything was perfectly normal. But the people around her were frozen in silence. Everyone stared at the newborn in complete shock. No one could believe what they were seeing. Dr. Thompson, the veterinarian, stood there with a pale face. He hadn't said a word to the Johnsons yet. Instead, he quietly began packing up his tools. "Dr. Thompson," Mrs. Johnson asked carefully, "do you have any idea what's going on?" But all he could do was mumble. I'm sorry," the vet finally said. "I'm sorry, but this isn't a foal." Mrs. Johnson just stood there, confused. Not a foal, she thought. Then what could it be? What was going on with Daisy's newborn, and why was the vet acting so strange? And more than that, how did Daisy get pregnant in the first place? In a quiet little town out in the countryside, the Johnson family ran a small farm that had been in their family for generations. They were known by everyone in the area for how much they loved and cared for their animals, especially their favorite mare, Daisy. Daisy was a beautiful black horse with a kind, gentle nature, and everyone in town adored her. She had never been used for breeding, since the Johnsons mostly kept her as a companion. So when she started acting strangely one spring morning, it caught them completely off guard. She was pacing around her stall, whinnying and stomping her hooves on the ground. Clear signs of stress. Mrs. Johnson, who had worked with horses her whole life, recognized the behavior right away and started to suspect Daisy might actually be in labor. That didn't make any sense. Daisy had never shown any signs of being pregnant. Still, they didn't want to take any chances, so they called their local vet, Dr. Thompson, who rushed over right away. He had been the Johnsons' vet for years and knew Daisy well. When Dr. Thompson got there, he was met by a worried Mr. Johnson, who led him straight to Daisy's stall. The vet took one look at her and quickly confirmed she was in labor, and that the foal would be arriving soon. Mrs. Johnson was stunned. No stallion had been anywhere near Daisy. Not in the barn, not even in the nearby meadow. So how could she possibly be pregnant? But there was no time to figure that out now. Daisy needed help. Luckily, Dr. Thompson had brought everything he might need and began setting up, just in case things got difficult. For now, though, he explained that Daisy was only in the early stage of labor. It could take several hours, or even a full day, before she reached active labor. To start, all they could really do was wait. But Mrs. Johnson wasn't the type to sit around doing nothing. She needed answers. Who had gotten Daisy pregnant? Maybe figuring that out could help explain more about the foal. Thankfully, they had cameras set up around the farm, installed years ago after a separate incident. So all Mrs. Johnson had to do was check the old footage, and that's exactly what she did. She started going through the recordings, roughly back to the time Daisy would have been impregnated. It didn't take long before she spotted something unusual. As she fast-forwarded through the footage, her eyes suddenly widened in shock. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. On the night Daisy must have been bred, she had been alone in her stall. But then something incredible appeared on the video. Someone had opened the gate, and a stallion walked right in. Mrs. Johnson instantly realized this wasn't an accident. Someone had planned this. But who would do something like that, and why? What would they gain from it? She quickly called her husband and Dr. Thompson over. The three of them stood around the computer, watching the strange video in stunned silence. Then Mrs. Johnson recognized the stallion. It was Rocky, their neighbor's horse. She had noticed Rocky acting odd a few weeks earlier, but she never imagined he could be involved in Daisy's pregnancy. But when she looked closer, she saw something even more surprising. A woman had opened Daisy's stall to let Rocky in. That made no sense. Rocky's owner was a widower and lived alone. So who was that woman? It raised even more questions, but there was no time to think. Just then, Dr. Thompson called out. Daisy was entering active labor. Mrs. Johnson rushed back to the stall and found Daisy lying on the ground, clearly distressed. "It won't be long now," Dr. Thompson said with a calm smile. You could actually see Daisy's belly tighten and release with strong rhythmic contractions, signaling the next stage of labor had begun. But instead of staying down, Daisy rolled, stood up, paced nervously, then lay down again. She looked exhausted and anxious. Hopefully it would be over soon, but they couldn't be sure. Daisy was breathing heavily, and Mrs. Johnson felt her heart tightening with worry. She loved this horse like family. Dr. Thompson tried to reassure her, saying everything was still progressing as expected. Mrs. Johnson nodded, but deep down, something didn't sit right. Sweat was dripping from Daisy's face, and her eyes were wide with discomfort. Even though Dr. Thompson was the expert, Mrs. Johnson had known Daisy her whole life. And when something felt off, she trusted her gut. She told Dr. Thompson again that something wasn't right. But his answer didn't change. That's when Mrs. Johnson realized she had to take action. She turned to her husband, and the look in her eyes said it all. Mr. Johnson could see the fear on her face. But what could they really do? Dr. Thompson hadn't left Daisy's side once. Then suddenly, Mr. Johnson got an idea. He took a few slow steps backward, glanced behind him, and purposely tripped over a feed bucket. The loud thud startled everyone. Mrs. Johnson and Dr. Thompson gasped as they heard him hit the ground. Mr. Johnson let out a yell, pretending to be in real pain, even though it wasn't that bad. He was just playing it up to get Dr. Thompson's attention. And it worked. The vet immediately ran over and knelt beside Mr. Johnson, helping him up. But that still wasn't enough. Mr. Johnson held his hand to his head and let out a low moan. "My head. It hurts. I think I need to lie down," he said weakly. "Dr. Thompson, can you help me inside?" Dr. Thompson, who was standing right next to him and holding his arm, couldn't exactly refuse. He glanced over at Mrs. Johnson, hoping she'd say, "I'll do it," but she didn't say a word. "I'll be back in a second." "Keep an eye on Daisy and don't get too close," Dr. Thompson said quickly as he helped Mr. Johnson toward the house. But Mrs. Johnson had no plans to just watch from a distance. She knew her horse better than anyone, and she knew Daisy needed comfort. She gently stepped into Daisy's stall, ignoring the vet's warning. The moment her hand touched Daisy's back, the horse's breathing seemed to settle just a little. Mrs. Johnson softly stroked her and whispered reassurances, telling her it was going to be okay. Then she looked under Daisy's tail and saw that the foal was almost here. But something wasn't right. Daisy had been in labor far too long, and the foal should have been born by now. She watched closely as Daisy tried to push, and suddenly it hit her. The foal was breached. This was serious, and it wasn't going to fix itself. If they didn't act soon, things could go very wrong for both Daisy and the foal. Dr. Thompson returned not long after, and Mrs. Johnson immediately told him what she'd seen. He took one look at Daisy and knew she was right. The situation was more dangerous than he'd first thought. For the first time, he stopped hesitating. He agreed. They had to help, and fast. He quickly called for backup from other vets in the area. This birth needed extra hands and expertise. Within the hour, a team of veterinarians arrived at the farm, ready to assist with the complicated delivery. Dr. Thompson and his team worked carefully and quickly. They confirmed what Mrs. Johnson had seen. The foal was in a breech position, coming out backwards instead of head first. That made the birth far more dangerous for both mother and baby. With focused teamwork, the vets began gently maneuvering the foal into a safer position. Every move was delicate but steady, making sure the legs were lined up right to avoid hurting Daisy or the foal. It was a tough job, and one that needed calm minds and skilled hands. Meanwhile, Mrs. Johnson stood at the side, watching and feeling completely helpless. It tore her up inside to see her sweet Daisy struggling like this. She knew labor could be risky, but this was worse than anything she'd ever experienced with a horse. A deep feeling of anger built up inside her, not at Daisy, but at whoever had caused this. Since she couldn't do anything to help with the birth, she made up her mind. She would go confront their neighbor, right now, with the footage. She marched straight over to his farm and banged hard on his front door. He opened it quickly, clearly surprised. "Mrs. Johnson?" "What's going on? I was just eating dinner." "Your dinner can wait," she snapped. "What did you do to Daisy?" Her neighbor Philip looked puzzled. "I have no idea what you're talking about," he said, his brow furrowing. "Oh, I'll show you," Mrs. Johnson replied, her voice firm. She walked into his house without waiting for an invite, placed her laptop on the table, and pressed play. "Explain this," she demanded. Philip stared at the footage, his face going pale. That was clearly his stallion, Rocky, but he looked genuinely stunned. "I swear, I didn't do this," he said. But Mrs. Johnson wasn't ready to listen. Philip leaned in, watching the screen again more closely. Then something clicked. "Wait," he said, leaning forward. "I know that hand." But instead of saying more right away, he went quiet. "Well?" Mrs. Johnson asked, narrowing her eyes. "Whose hand is it? Who's the woman?" Philip looked down, a wave of sadness coming over him. It's my daughter," he said quietly. "I don't know why, but she must have let Rocky into Daisy's stall." Mrs. Johnson opened her mouth to ask more questions, but just then her phone rang. It was Dr. Thompson calling. The foal could arrive any moment. Mrs. Johnson rushed back to the farm, with Philip hurrying behind her. "Where have you been?" Dr. Thompson asked as soon as she arrived. "Daisy's losing a lot of blood. We need to get that foal out now." The tiny hooves were already showing, but Daisy was completely worn out from the long labor. She didn't have the strength left to finish it on her own. So Dr. Thompson looped a special birthing chain around the foal's legs to help ease it out. He kept a close eye on Daisy's belly and, with every contraction, gave a gentle pull. It was tense. Everyone held their breath. Sweat ran down Dr. Thompson's forehead as he steadied his grip and pulled again. This time things looked better. The foal was slowly making its way out. Daisy, though clearly exhausted, was hanging in there. "All right, Daisy, just one more push," Dr. Thompson encouraged her. He got ready for one last pull, and with that the foal finally slid out and landed softly on the ground. A huge wave of relief washed over the group. But that feeling didn't last long. The foal wasn't moving. Mrs. Johnson felt a tight knot in her chest as she watched Daisy gently lick the newborn. The first few minutes dragged on painfully. No one said a word. Everyone stared, waiting, hoping. Just when Mrs. Johnson turned to look away, she caught a small twitch. Then another, and then the foal tried to stand. Mrs. Johnson immediately wrapped her arms around Dr. Thompson, overwhelmed with relief. But when she looked at him, he didn't smile back. His face had gone pale. "What is it, doctor?" she asked, her voice low. "That's not a normal foal," he said cautiously. Mrs. Johnson frowned, but when she looked closer, she had to admit, the foal didn't look much like Daisy or Rocky. "What's wrong with it?" she asked. Before Dr. Thompson could answer, they heard a car pull into the driveway. Mrs. Johnson turned toward the sound, confused. Then she saw Philip walk around the corner of the house. In that moment, everything clicked. He had called his daughter. "You!" Mrs. Johnson shouted as the young woman approached Daisy's stall. "You did this to my Daisy." "Okay, let's all stay calm," Dr. Thompson said quickly. "Who is she?" "I'm Philip's daughter." "Tilly," the woman said quietly. "She's the one who let Rocky in with Daisy," Mrs. Johnson shouted again, still furious. Tilly sighed. "Yes, I did, but I'm not proud of it," she admitted. "I was in a tough spot. I needed money. And knowing Rocky's bloodline, I thought this could help me fast." Mrs. Johnson was stunned. "How was that going to work?" "Daisy is my horse. How could you make money from this?" Tilly looked down, fiddling with her hands nervously. "My dad doesn't know this, but I had a DNA test done on Rocky. We adopted him without knowing his background, and I was just curious. When the results came back, I couldn't believe it. Rocky isn't just any horse. He's a knabstrupper, a rare breed worth a lot." She paused before continuing. "I was desperate, but I couldn't bring myself to sell Rocky. I thought if he had a foal, I could sell that instead. I know it was wrong. I planned to take the foal once it was born, but I realized that wouldn't work. I felt awful. That's why I kept coming to check on Daisy. I couldn't stop thinking about what I did. I'm really, really sorry." There was a long silence. Then Mrs. Johnson spoke. "I'm not going to call the police, Tilly." Everyone looked surprised. Just moments ago, she had been furious. "It's been a long, stressful day," she continued, "and it could have ended much worse. But it didn't. Still, I want you off my property, and I don't want to see you here again." Her voice was firm. Tilly nodded. She understood. She had broken the Johnsons' trust for her own selfish reasons. Without another word, she turned and quietly walked away. Daisy and her foal both made a full recovery. Mrs. Johnson named the foal Dorothy, which means gift of God in Greek, and every now and then she'd let Rocky come graze with them in the pasture. She never sold Daisy or Dorothy. She wasn't interested in the money. All that mattered was that they were safe and they were home. Together, they lived a long, peaceful life. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more real-life animal tales like it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the video. We've got plenty more heartwarming stories coming your way. See you next time.